Guys, yesterday I talked to you all about Flames. Today it's time to talk about Lauma, the second 5-star character of the 6.0 patch. Lauma has attracted the attention of many with her aesthetic primarily, but today I'm here to bring your eyes up here again and make you focus on her kit instead of something else. So, Lauma is a 5-star Dendro character, the first one to come out since Kinich from a year ago, and a rarity for the game in general, as Dendro has largely been abandoned as an archetype after Sumeru. She's a Catalyst character, and she scales off Elemental Mastery, which is the stat of hers that gets increased through Ascension. Lauma is, in my opinion, one of the most interesting 5-stars we got in a while. At her core, she's a Bloom support, but she has various aspects in her kit that make her unique in this role, and in my opinion, her kit really makes a lot of sense. Most of what's good about it comes from her Elemental skill. Specifically, the hold version of the skill is where it's at, and to cast it, Lauma will need to have something called Verdant Dew. Verdant Dew is something Lauma uniquely gets after the team generates a Bloom through an elemental reaction, and she can stack up to 3. When using her skill, she will consume all the Verdant Dew she has and deal damage accordingly, as well as get stacks of something called Moon Song, of the same amount as the dews she consumed. These stacks will be useful for her elemental burst later on. Furthermore, the skill initiates continuous Dendro AoE attacks that have a frequency of 2 seconds per hit, and will last for 15 seconds in total, so she's a solid off-field Dendro applier. Lastly, when any of the elemental skill attacks hit an opponent, they will decrease his resistance to Dendro and Hydro by an amount that reaches 25% at talent level 10. This is basically a slightly weaker version of Nilu's Constellation 2, which reduces resistance to Dendro and Hydro but by 35% instead, and it's pretty great for Lauma to have this, because aside from that Constellation, Hydro characters in the team never had access to resistance reduction in any consistent way, since for example, Anemo characters are not allowed on Nilu teams, and so Lauma fixes this, fixes the fact that the raw damage output has always been on the lower side. Having said that, let me focus on the damage the elemental skill does. The continuous attacks have significant elemental mastery scaling, but they aren't really all that in terms of total damage dealt. What's vastly more important here is the damage she deals at the start. That depends on how many Verdant Dews she had. This damage is of direct Lunar Bloom type, a new mechanic Lauma is bringing into the table. You should really pay attention here, because even I was stun-locked for a bit after reading things through for the first time in her kit. Lauma makes every bloom generated by the team a lunar bloom, but these blooms won't do anything different than normal blooms and will also inflict the same amount of damage with the same formula. The only benefit of Lunar Bloom is that it generates the Verdant Dew for Lauma, but otherwise they're no different. However, direct Lunar Bloom is a different story. Remember that by direct lunar attacks, the game refers to lunar type attacks that are directly dealt through abilities, like Lauma's elemental skill. These attacks have a direct multiplier which scales directly from the character stat, they scale off crit like any normal attack, and they also ignore defense. As a result, they're really strong abilities. For example, in Lauma's case, her skill ends up having an effective 1300 elemental mastery multiplier when fully stacked, and it's by far the strongest attack in her kit. Now, this sounds awesome and all, but I know what you're all thinking. Does this mean that Lauma effectively does nothing for Bloom outside of her own damage? That's not quite true. While Lunar Bloom doesn't increase the Bloom damage for others, Lauma still increases that damage through the rest of her kit. This starts from her Elemental Burst, which when used will consume all the Moon Song stacks she gained from her skill previously, and increase the damage for all blooms generated by the team depending on that amount. This damage increase is basically a quill, like Shen has quills, Hyunjin quills, and so on. It scales off her elemental mastery, and will add a flat damage amount to the total bloom damage. Also, just like those quills, each stack will increase only a single instance of damage, meaning that AoE scenarios will consume more stacks at once. Additionally, Lauma will give all bloom type attacks fixed crit rate and crit damage values, meaning they will be able to crit occasionally. This is just what Nahida's Constellation 2 does, and previously it was purely exclusive to her. I like how Lauma is practically making these constellations accessible to everybody. It's really funny. Overall, while Lunar Bloom does nothing, Lauma still ends up increasing the bloom damage dealt by the team by a significant amount. This will be more felt on teams like Nilou Bloom, where Bloom makes up for a vast amount of the team damage, as opposed to teams like Hyper Bloom or Quick Bloom, where the damage contribution is much lower for the bloom itself. Lauma also can get additional crit increases for her own lunar type damage, but this will require the presence of a second Nodcry character on the team, since it's tied to the moon sign mechanic. I know the free Hydro 4-star we're getting next patch will be more than enough for the role. Still, it's worth saying that this is the only part of Lauma's kit that is reliant on having a second Nodcry character in the team, and it's really not that instrumental. Like, it's nice, but it's not obligatory, and so she should do quite well even without Aino on team. Anyway, I want to say something more about Lunar Bloom before jumping to team calculations. The way her kit is structured, it's clear to me that she's made with a Lunar Bloom DPS in mind, just like Ineffa was made with Flames in mind. Matter of fact, she has a passive that increases Lunar Bloom damage for the team, even though she's the only one to deal that type of attack. Her burst also provides quills for Lunar Bloom on top of that, and so I think the endgame here is for Nefer to come out and be the main DPS on Lauma teams. All we have right now, however, is current teams, so let's talk about them. But before I do that, let me remind you that if you enjoy my channel but you haven't subbed yet, please consider doing so, because it really makes me notice your support. So, if I had to name a specific character that really benefits from Lauma's release, that would be, without a doubt, Nilou. Nilou teams always had a strong presence in AoE scenarios, even by today's standards. However, they're absolutely awful in single target situations, and with those becoming more and more frequent, it just made the flaws of the team more noticeable. If you paid any attention before, Lauma is partially a single target bloom buffer because of her burst, because the quills that come from it will quickly be depleted in AoE scenarios, but in single target situations they will last for the whole rotation pretty much. The result is a team whose single target damage output is vastly increased with Lauma's release. Pretty much any Nilou Bloom variant will become meta relevant with the addition of Lauma, and that's awesome. Keep in mind that this calculation is just showing the single target output of the team and not the AoE one, because AoE in general is pretty inconsistent, and so it's hard to calculate, especially for Nilou teams. Now, when taken by itself, the single target output is still not great by meta standards, but the point here is that this is a fantastic team in AoE situations that can still be competent enough in single target scenarios. While before it was just good in AoE, but awful, almost unusable in single target. Also, Lauma's capability to reduce Hydro resistance made the traditional Hydro DPSs more viable here, like for example Nubilet. I mean, what else is new? Another buff for Nubilet. This guy just keeps getting teams. For other Bloom teams, it depends. Regarding pure Hyper Bloom compositions, so lineups where you have a lot of Hydro application and you mostly care about Hyper Bloom damage, this will see a large increase. Lauma is a catalyst character, and so she can act as the sole Dendro applier for the team, replacing somebody like Nahida. The double Hydro core itself also ends up benefiting from her presence compared to when they're paired with Nahida, since she also reduces Hydro resistance. I haven't calculated Burgeon yet, but that team should see a similar relative increase as this one. Meanwhile, for Hyper Bloom compositions that have dedicated main DPSs, the situation is different. Specifically, teams with DPSs like Sino and Alhaitham that like to play on Quick Bloom teams where Quicken has decent consistency. Lauma doesn't do much for Quicken aside from reducing Dendro resistance, and she really prefers more Hyper Bloom focused lineups. For both Alhaitham and Sino, getting more Hyper Bloom means getting less Quicken, and so they're not really DPSs that fit with their Lauma's archetype. While they could see a small bump regardless, it's nothing compared to what other teams are getting. So, just to conclude this video, I like Lauma kit-wise, definitely more than Flames. I think she's in a similar position as Ineffa before Flames came out, meaning very strong and competitive in some current teams, but definitely in a work-in-progress situation, waiting for her main DPS to come out, probably Nefer. And with this, I'm done for today. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe, and also go check the latest Flames video I made yesterday. Bye bye.